The vastness of space stretched endlessly, cold and silent, as the expedition ship Verilon drifted toward a derelict structure floating beyond the mapped territories. Captain Exhilarating of the Vran Dominion stood at the viewport, his four crimson eyes narrowing as he studied the massive station ahead. It was old, far older than his own civilization. The markings on its surface were barely visible beneath layers of dust and ice, but there was no mistaking the strange, angular design. This was human. Exhilarating turned to his crew, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his mind. "Prepare to dock. We're going inside." No one questioned him. The Vran Dominion prided itself on its courage, but even the bravest among them could feel the weight of history pressing down. Humanity had vanished millennia ago, leaving behind only ruins and ghost stories. Every civilization in the galaxy knew the legend. The humans were once rulers, their empire stretching farther than any other. And then, one day, they were gone. Some believed they had perished in their own wars. Others whispered that they had ascended to something greater. As the Verilon latched onto the station, the airlock hissed open. The crew stepped inside, their boots echoing in the lifeless halls. The station was enormous, a labyrinth of corridors and towering chambers filled with dormant technology. Thick cables snaked across the walls, leading deeper into the heart of the structure. Everything was cold, still, dead. Exhilarating motioned for his team to spread out, their scanners sweeping for anything of value. If they could recover human technology, the Dominion's power would grow beyond measure. Yet, as they moved forward, the air itself seemed heavier. The silence was wrong. It wasn't just emptiness, it was waiting. One of the crew members, a younger officer named Jurak, stopped before an enormous console covered in dust. He wiped a clawed hand across its surface, revealing lines of text in an ancient human language. His translator struggled to make sense of it, but one phrase flickered across his visor. "Command system engaged." Jurak's breath caught in his throat. "Captain, something's happening." Before Exhilarating could respond, the console lit up. A low hum resonated through the station, growing into a deep mechanical roar. Across the hall, long-dead machinery flickered to life. Red warning lights flashed. Symbols streamed across ancient displays. A sound, like the slow exhale of a slumbering beast, filled the chamber as the station awoke. Panic spread through the crew. They had touched something they shouldn't have. Exhilarating barked orders, demanding a retreat, but it was already too late. Beyond the station, the darkness of space began to shift. One by one, ships emerged from the void. Colossal warships, their blackened hulls scarred by time but still intact. Their designs were unlike anything modern civilizations used, their weaponry ancient yet terrifying. The human fleet had reawakened. The ships didn't drift like wreckage. They moved with purpose. Engines that had been silent for eons flared to life, and across the fleet, systems activated in perfect synchronization. The station had not been a ruin. It had been a command center. And the fleet had been waiting for a signal. Exhilarating barely had time to process what was happening before his ship's alarms blared. A transmission, cold and metallic, echoed through their systems. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't a warning. It was a command. The fleet has awakened. Reclaim the stars. The war machines turned toward the galaxy, and the silence of space was shattered by the thunder of engines as the forgotten fleet surged forward. The Vran Dominion ship Verilon barely managed to disengage from the ancient station as the awakening human fleet surged to life. The massive warships, blackened by time but still imposing, moved with terrifying precision. Captain Exhilarating had no idea what he had just unleashed, but every instinct in his body screamed that they had to escape. "Get us out of here. Now," he barked. The pilot's claws danced across the control panel, and the Verilon veered away, thrusters burning hot as they fled the awakening giant. But even as they distanced themselves, Exhilarating couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. From the viewport, the sight was both mesmerizing and horrifying. The station, once cold and lifeless, was now fully operational. Lights pulsed along its structure, energy surging through cables and conduits. The human warships, hundreds in number, arranged themselves in tight formations like a perfectly drilled armada. It was not the movement of derelict ships guided by old automated systems. It was tactical, deliberate, alive. "Captain." Jarak's voice was barely above a whisper, his trembling hand pointing at the sensors. Xerlos turned his attention to the data streaming across the screen. A new signal had emerged, one that sent ice through his veins. The human fleet was transmitting. The language was ancient, but their translation software barely managed to process the first line. "Identify. State AFILIATION." The Verilon's comms officer looked at Xerlos in horror. "They're asking who we are." Xerlos clenched his jaw. This wasn't an automated system blindly attacking anything in its path. The fleet was aware, alive. He swallowed, considering their options. If they responded, would the humans see them as allies or enemies? If they ignored it, would the fleet open fire? But before he could decide, the signal shifted. The transmission was no longer directed at them. It was spreading. Across subspace channels, encrypted frequencies, and long-abandoned military networks, the human fleet broadcasted a simple yet chilling message across the galaxy. "The Armada has Reawakened. Stand by for strategic reclamation." The words carried a weight that civilizations across the stars could feel. This wasn't just an awakening. It was a declaration. Somewhere deep within the command station, buried beneath layers of forgotten technology, ancient databanks flickered online. A cold, mechanical voice echoed through the vast corridors, its words dripping with authority. "Identifying active assets. Human empire status. Unknown. Initiating contingency protocols. Reclamation process begins now." Xerlos watched as the fleet adjusted course, engines flaring as the warships oriented toward the galactic core. They weren't just waking up. They were mobilizing. And if history had taught the galaxy anything, it was that when humanity moved in force, war followed. "You said." The news spread quickly, faster than even Captain Xerlos could process. Throughout the galaxy, old communication systems, long thought to be lost or obsolete, crackled back to life. Faint transmissions carried the same message the human fleet had broadcasted. The galaxy was now aware. The humans were not gone. Their ancient fleet had reawakened, and they were coming. Within days, the major galactic factions scrambled to understand what had occurred. Some dismissed the threat, thinking it a fluke. After all, the humans had been gone for millennia. Surely, their fleet, outdated and forgotten, would pose no significant danger. Others, more cautious, gathered their forces. The Vran Dominion, among the galaxy's most powerful and fearsome species, stood divided on the next move. Some factions wanted to approach the newly awakened humans with diplomacy, while others, like Captain Xerlos, believed that this was a threat of unimaginable scale. In the Vran War Council chambers, tensions ran high. Xerlos stood before the council, a group of 8 high-ranking Vran officials, their bodies radiating an air of superiority and disdain. They looked down on Xerlos, their 6 eyes gleaming with cold calculation. "You are a fool," one of the council members spat, his voice heavy with contempt. "You've stirred a hornet's nest for nothing. The human fleet is no threat. They are relics of the past." Xerlos' crimson eyes narrowed. "A relic that just broadcasted across the galaxy. A fleet of warships that hasn't moved in centuries is now active. Have you not seen what I saw?" Another council member, this one with slick green scales and a jagged crown-like crest, leaned forward. "What if they're just trying to contact us? What if they've come to offer peace?" "Peace." Xerlos' voice was a low growl, dripping with disbelief. "Do you think they've awakened after eons of silence to offer peace? These are warships. What if they've come to take back what they lost? Or worse, to destroy us all for what we've done in their absence? The room fell silent. Thurlow's words hung heavy in the air. Even the most stubborn of the council could not dismiss the gravity of what was unfolding. "We cannot take any chances," Hexerlos continued, his voice rising with authority. "We need to act, or we risk everything. The humans will not come back as allies. They will come back as conquerors." The council hesitated, then turned to face each other. In the end, it was clear that Hexerlos had made his point. They couldn't afford to ignore this threat, no matter how much they hoped it would be nothing more than a shadow from the past. But in the council's hesitation, the human fleet had already moved. Across the galaxy, the ancient warships sped forward, their course set. The fleets of the Vran Dominion, the Jundari Confederacy, and the Sorkar Ascendancy moved into defensive positions, preparing for the worst. They had underestimated humanity once, and now they feared they might pay the price. And as the fleets of the galaxy assembled, something more sinister unfolded in the depths of space. Beneath the calm surface of the vast cosmos, the galaxy's governments didn't understand the true nature of the threat they faced. The humans were not simply returning. They were coming back with an agenda. The stars themselves seemed to dim as the human fleet approached, each ship brimming with the remnants of an empire long thought to be gone. The immense power they once wielded was now a mere whisper in the galaxy's forgotten history. But it was still there, and it was ready. What they didn't know was that the human fleet didn't need to reclaim the stars. The humans already had everything they needed. All they had to do was remind the galaxy of what they were capable of. The reclamation had begun. And the galaxy, standing on the precipice of war, was about to learn that the humans had never truly been gone. They had only been waiting. As the human fleet advanced, the galaxy braced itself for the unknown. The fleets of the Vran Dominion, Jundari Confederacy, and Sorkar Ascendancy stood ready, their ships positioned strategically along their borders. Leaders from across the stars sent their finest diplomats and military commanders to the front lines, hoping to intercept and understand what the humans wanted. Some believed there was still a chance for peaceful negotiation. Others feared that war was inevitable, but no one could predict what was coming next. The humans hadn't fired a single shot, yet the mere presence of their fleet had already caused chaos. Trade routes were disrupted, and entire star systems that had been stable for centuries were thrown into uncertainty. The quiet hum of daily life across the galaxy had been replaced with the low murmur of fear and speculation. What did the humans want? Why had they returned now, of all times? On the planet Rilfar, an ancient world on the edge of Vran Dominion territory, Captain Hexerlos sat in the command center of his ship, Verilon. The image of the human fleet, a formidable line of warships, floated on the screen before him. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair as his mind raced. The transmissions that had been received were becoming more cryptic by the day, the tone of the humans' communication shifting from neutral to coldly authoritative. They had not yet threatened, but every action they took seemed to demand that the galaxy recognize them. "What are they waiting for?" Hexerlos muttered under his breath, his eyes darting across the readings on his ship's display. The humans had made no direct move, no attacks, no hostile actions, but their fleet had positioned itself near the heart of the galaxy, close enough to strike anywhere within hours. Every faction in the galaxy was watching, waiting to see what they would do next. The silence was suffocating. Suddenly, an encrypted message came through. The code was unmistakably human. The command staff in the room exchanged wary glances as Hexerlos activated the transmission. The voice that crackled through the speakers was deep, mechanical, and yet unmistakably human. It was the same cold tone that had sent shivers down Hexerlos' spine during his initial encounter with the human fleet. "To the leaders of the galaxy, you have been chosen. Stand down. Your reign is over." Hexerlos' heart skipped a beat. The transmission was a direct threat. The humans were not asking for an audience. They were not requesting a seat at the galactic table. They were demanding submission. Before anyone could respond, the transmission continued. You have been weighed, you have been measured, and you are found lacking. The empire of humanity will not be denied. Prepare for the reclamation. The message ended abruptly. The room was silent, the weight of the words hanging heavy in the air. There was no room for negotiation. There was no plea for peace. The humans had spoken with the certainty of a species that had once ruled the stars, and they were prepared to do so again. Xerlos clenched his fists, feeling the pulse of adrenaline surge through his veins. His instincts told him that they had made a grave mistake. There was no way to predict the full scale of what the human fleet was capable of, but he knew one thing: the time for diplomacy was over. The galaxy had been on the verge of chaos for years, but this was something different. They won't stop until they have everything back. Xerlos muttered, the realization dawning on him. He turned to his second-in-command, Jarak. We need to send a response. Rally the other fleets. The time for talk is finished. Jarak hesitated, his eyes flickering with doubt. Captain, we don't know the full extent of their power. The humans might have technology that we can't waste time wondering about their ships or their weapons. Terrible fed him off. We need to act. The humans have awoken, and they've made their intentions clear. They want to reclaim the galaxy, and they won't stop until it's theirs again. In the distance, the human warships loomed like dark giants, their weapons silent for now, but their engines humming with purpose. The stage had been set. War had not yet begun, but the tension in the air was palpable. The galaxy had been divided for millennia, each faction fighting for control, but this was different. This wasn't just another war. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. And the worst part was that no one in the galaxy had ever imagined that humankind, a species thought lost to the ages, would be the one to reunite the stars under their rule. As the fleets of the galaxy began to move into formation, preparing for whatever came next, one thing became clear: the reclamation had begun, and the fate of the entire galaxy hung in the balance. You said, the tension in the galaxy reached its breaking point. Every corner of space was watching, waiting, and preparing for what the humans would do next. The message had been clear. Humanity had returned, and they were not here to ask for permission. The fleets of the galaxy, once fragmented and separate, now stood united in a single collective effort to stave off the threat that the human fleet represented. But even as they gathered, no one could predict the scale of what was about to unfold. Across the Vran Dominion's flagship Verilon, Captain Xerlos paced restlessly. The news had spread like wildfire. The humans were not only moving in numbers far greater than anticipated, but their tactics and strategies seemed far more advanced than the galaxy had expected. They were methodical, calculating, and above all, unpredictable. Each encounter left more questions than answers. Have we received any new transmissions from the human fleet? Xerlos asked, his voice sharp with impatience. Jarak, his second-in-command, looked up from the array of blinking consoles. Yes, Captain. Another message, encrypted. The same human voice. He hesitated, uncertain of how to proceed. Play it, Xerlos ordered, his tone brokering no argument. The communication was broadcasted across the room, and the cold, mechanical voice of the human fleet commander echoed once more. The galaxy has been warned. Your response was insufficient. The reclamation begins now. We offer you a choice. Stand aside, or be swept away. There was a long pause before the voice added one final chilling statement. Humanity does not beg for power. We take it. Xerlos felt a shiver run down his spine as the message ended. The humans were not negotiating. They were laying down an ultimatum. Stand aside or face complete destruction. The odds seemed insurmountable, but Xerlos couldn't allow the galaxy to be brought to its knees by a force no one had prepared for. We have to rally the fleets, Xerlos muttered, his mind racing. We need to fight back. We can't let them take everything. Jarak nodded, but his face was tense. It's not that simple, Captain. The human fleet is unlike anything we've seen before. They're ships. They don't fight like anyone else. Xerlos glanced out the viewport, staring at the distant horizon of space. The human fleet had spread across the stars, seemingly moving into strategic positions across multiple sectors. They were not spreading out blindly, as Xerlos had initially thought. They were taking control of critical systems, positioning themselves to strike at the galaxy's weakest points. Every move they made was deliberate, surgical. It was as if they knew exactly where to hit to break the galaxy's defenses apart. The captain clenched his fists. Then we'll show them that they've made a mistake underestimating us. We can't afford hesitation now. The command room was silent for a moment, everyone understanding the weight of the decision. Every strategy they'd relied on for centuries, every battle tactic, every weapon system, was being tested by an enemy no one had expected. The humans were playing a different game altogether, and if they didn't adapt quickly, they might lose everything. In the far reaches of the galaxy, the human fleet continued to advance, their ships casting long shadows across the stars. Their path was precise, each ship moving as though they were part of a grand, coordinated machine. There was no sign of weakness, no sign of fatigue. The human fleet was unstoppable. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. A small exploratory fleet from the Jundari Confederacy, once considered a minor power, was the first to meet the human ships in open space. It happened without warning. The Jundari fleet, a mix of older, slower ships, engaged the humans near the planet Valcora, a system that had long been a peaceful trade hub. From the moment the first shot was fired, it was clear the human fleet wasn't here to talk. The Jundari ships never had a chance. The humans' tactical brilliance was evident as they crushed the fleet with minimal casualties on their side. Every maneuver was calculated, every strike devastating. It was a spectacle of efficiency that sent a message to the rest of the galaxy. Resistance would be futile. Within hours, news of the defeat spread like wildfire. Every major government, every faction, now knew that the humans had come with one purpose: to take back what they believed was theirs, and they would stop at nothing to do so. Back in the War Council of the Vran Dominion, Xerlos faced the inevitable. We've underestimated them. We cannot allow this to happen again, he said, his voice strained with frustration. We need to strike first. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew that the situation was spiraling out of control. The humans had declared their intent. They had already defeated one fleet with terrifying precision, and the worst part was that this was only the beginning. As the galaxy prepared itself for the storm ahead, one undeniable truth hung in the air. The reclamation was no longer a hypothetical threat. Humanity was here, and they were willing to destroy anyone who stood in their way. The galaxy was on the brink of an all-out war, and no one knew how it would end. But one thing was certain: the future of the stars now rested in the hands of humanity. The galaxy was in chaos. Systems once united under the banner of diplomacy and trade were now fractured, each faction scrambling to react to the human fleet's overwhelming presence. The events that followed the destruction of the Jundari Confederacy's fleet sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Panic set in as leaders, commanders, and civilians alike realized that humanity was not just a relic of the past. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they had come for more than just vengeance. In the heart of the Vran Dominion, Captain Xerlos paced back and forth in his command room. His mind raced with the implications of the last few days. Despite all their preparations, the Dominion was struggling to mount a defense against the humans' rapid advance. His fleet was strong, but it had already been shown that strength alone would not be enough. It was becoming clear: the humans had technology, tactics, and weapons that no one had anticipated. They've crushed one of our allies, Xerlos. Jarek's voice cut through his thoughts. The second-in-command's voice was strained, his eyes dark with the weight of their losses. They're moving towards other sectors now. We don't have much time. Xerlos turned to face him, his brow furrowed. I know, Jarek. But what do you want me to do? How do we stop a fleet that seems to anticipate every move we make? Chirac hesitated, then spoke with quiet resolve. We fight with everything we have. We need to rally the others. If we stand united, maybe we can at least slow them down. Tsarlos clenched his fists, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew that rallying the galaxy's forces would not be easy. The humans had already proven that their actions were far more decisive than any bureaucratic meeting. But if there was any chance of stopping them, they needed a counterattack. Something unexpected, something the humans couldn't predict. As he stared out into the starry void, Tsarlos' mind worked through every possibility. Their fleets were too scattered, their communication too fractured. The humans were not just fighting with technology, they were fighting with absolute certainty. They knew their purpose, and their resolve was as cold and unforgiving as the deep space around them. They were not looking for a negotiated peace. The only language they seemed to understand was power. The next transmission came with the eerie silence that had now become synonymous with humanity's arrival. It was a direct message from the human commander. The same mechanical voice they had all come to dread. The time for resistance is over. Your fleets are weak. Your resolve is broken. You have only one choice: surrender or perish. We will not rest until the stars are ours once again. Humanity's reclamation is inevitable. The message was chilling in its simplicity. No grand threats, no boastful promises, just the stark, unflinching truth. They would not stop until they had achieved their goal. Damn them, Tsarlos muttered, slamming his fist against the table. He turned to Chirac, his eyes steely with determination. Prepare the fleet. We're not going to sit back and wait for them to destroy us one by one. We'll show them that they haven't broken us. We'll fight to the last ship. Chirac nodded, though the doubt in his eyes was unmistakable. And if it's not enough? Tsarlos met his gaze, his voice steady. Then we fight for the future of the galaxy. In the weeks that followed, the various factions of the galaxy began to rally. The Vran Dominion, the Jundari Confederacy, and even the Sorkar Ascendancy, once bitter rivals, forged an uneasy alliance. Their forces, still recovering from the initial wave of the human onslaught, began to position themselves at key locations across the galaxy. It was clear that they had no choice but to stand together. But even as they formed their ranks, the fear remained. Fear of the unknown. Fear of a power they had never before encountered. The first battle after the formation of this new alliance took place in the Reawakened Nebula, a volatile and treacherous region of space, known for its dense asteroid fields and electromagnetic storms. It was here that the humans would make their next move, and the galaxy's united fleets hoped to catch them off guard. As the battle unfolded, it quickly became clear that the humans were always one step ahead. The human fleet had anticipated the trap, and as the Allied forces descended upon the nebula, the human ships suddenly appeared in the darkness like ghosts, silent, efficient, and far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. Despite the traps, despite the combined might of the galaxy's best fleets, the humans cut through them as if they were nothing more than paper. Ships were torn apart in seconds, their shields unable to withstand the barrage of human weaponry. The chaos that followed was brutal. The once gleaming ships of the Vran Dominion and the Jundari Confederacy now lay scattered in the nebula, nothing more than twisted wrecks in the cold vacuum of space. Captain Tsarlos fought to maintain control of his fleet, his heart racing as the destruction unfolded around him. He watched helplessly as his fleet's ships were picked off one by one. His mind whirled, but there was nothing he could do. Their defenses had been utterly overwhelmed. They were outmatched. And yet, through the madness of the battle, Tsarlos couldn't help but notice something. A human ship, alone in the distance, drifting at the center of the chaos. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. An enormous vessel, not part of the human fleet they had been tracking, its design far more intricate and advanced than anything the galaxy had witnessed before. For a moment, the battle slowed. It was as if the galaxy itself had stopped to stare at this looming, unknown threat. Was this the true heart of humanity's power? Before Exhilarating could process the thought, the human ship fired. A single shot, but it was enough. A massive explosion rippled through the nebula as one of the largest ships in the Dominion fleet, Thel's Fury, was torn apart in the blink of an eye. The Alliance had just lost their first major flagship, and the reality of the situation began to sink in. The humans were not just a threat. They were a force of nature. As the battle raged on, Exhilarating realized that humanity wasn't simply fighting for control. They were fighting to break the will of the galaxy, and they were succeeding. Every battle they fought, every ship they destroyed, made their presence more undeniable. The galaxy was not just witnessing the rise of a new power. It was witnessing the fall of everything they had ever known. The galaxy was on the edge of a precipice, teetering on the brink of an unprecedented collapse. In the wake of the destruction at the Reawakened Nebula, the once proud fleets of the galaxy's greatest powers were nothing more than shattered remnants. The few surviving commanders were scattered across the stars, retreating into whatever hideouts they could find, trying to regroup. But no matter where they went, the truth remained the same. Humanity was winning. Captain Exhilarating stood in the war room of what remained of the Grand Dominion's flagship Reawakened, the weight of his failures pressing down on him. His fleet had been devastated. The alliance of factions had fallen apart almost immediately after the defeat. Now, it was just him and his remaining crew, lost in the vastness of space, surrounded by enemy forces on all sides. "Captain, the last of our forces have been reported lost," GALACTIC said grimly, his voice hollow from exhaustion. "We have no more ships left to fight with. The galaxy, it's finished." Exhilarating turned away from the communication console, looking out the viewport at the endless sea of stars. There had been moments, fleeting and far between, when he had believed they could win this war. But now, with the human fleet growing stronger by the day, it was clear they could not win. "We've lost," Exhilarating muttered under his breath. "Humanity is going to destroy everything we've worked for, everything we've built." GALACTIC didn't reply, but the silence between them was heavy. But as Exhilarating stared into the blackness of space, his thoughts began to shift. He thought about his people, the Grand Dominion, the last line of defense for their kind. If they couldn't stop the humans, who would? What would happen to the galaxy if they just accepted defeat? "We can't give up," Exhilarating said suddenly, his voice low but full of renewed resolve. "If we surrender now, there will be nothing left. The galaxy will fall into chaos, and humanity will rule it with an iron fist. I refuse to let that happen." GALACTIC looked at him, uncertainty still in his eyes. "What can we do, Captain? We have no ships, no resources. We are on the edge of extinction." Exhilarating turned toward him, his face hardening with determination. "We don't need fleets. We don't need weapons. We need allies." It was a desperate plan, one that many of his officers would have considered suicidal. But Exhilarating knew that if there was any chance to defeat humanity, it lay in uniting the scattered remnants of the galaxy's civilizations. They would need to form an alliance unlike any other, one that could challenge humanity's dominance, one that could stand together against the unstoppable force that was sweeping across the stars. The key, Exhilarating realized, lay in the few surviving factions. There were still pockets of resistance, scattered across the galaxy, some of them hidden from the human fleet's reach. They could form the core of a new rebellion. With those forces, they could at least make a stand, perhaps even turn the tide. He quickly ordered his communications team to send out urgent transmissions. The message was clear. There was no more time to waste. The humans had proven that they could defeat them one by one, but together, they stood a chance. Exhilarating reached out to the few surviving leaders of the galaxy's fractured factions. It was a risk, but it was the only chance they had left. The response came within days, a small but significant victory. The Taldar Empire, one of the few remaining powers with a fleet intact, agreed to form an alliance. The Draka Combine, another resilient faction, joined the effort as well. Even the elusive Sorkar Ascendancy, who had long remained neutral in galactic affairs, responded, sending a small task force to join their forces. The war was far from over, but now, for the first time in months, Xyrilos felt a glimmer of hope. The galaxy's forces were gathering, preparing for a counteroffensive that would test the might of humanity's fleet. It would not be easy, but it was the only option left. Humanity had awakened an ancient fury, and the galaxy would never be the same. The stars would burn bright in the coming conflict, a war that would decide the fate of the galaxy forever. Meanwhile, the human fleet was advancing, their cold, mechanical efficiency evident in every sector they entered. As they reached the outer rim, their presence seemed unstoppable. But in the darkness of space, far from the eyes of the human commanders, the resistance was growing. Plans were being made, alliances were being forged, and hope was slowly starting to take root again. But no one in the galaxy knew what the humans would do next. The quiet fear that hung in the air grew heavier with each passing day. Would humanity take the remaining systems, forcing the galaxy to submit to their will? Or would the galaxy rise up in a final stand to fight for its survival? Captain Xyrilos stood in the war room once again, staring at the map of the galaxy. His mind was filled with the faces of the men and women who had given everything for this fight. There was no going back now. The final confrontation was on the horizon.